$339,000 to a part-time Chicago housekeeper who made $200 a week. $339,000, $200 a week. After receiving the mortgage, she went home to Poland, never made a single payment. $350,000 to an illiterate California dairy worker making $1,100 a month. $398,000 to a woman unemployed since 1988. Now, why would anybody lend money to people like that? It is simple. Because you make a fee when you write the mortgage, then the actual mortgage itself gets transferred to all of us through government-sponsored organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Thus, the connection between Angela Mozillo and Barney Frank, the unholy alliance of corporations and government. That's what Ayn Rand opposed. That's what Atlas Shrugged was about. That's when they got you. When corrupt companies and corrupt government get together. Now, Angela Mozillo was so deep in bed with Fannie and Freddie, it's ridiculous. They had, Countrywide had an exclusive deal with Fannie and Freddie to pass on toxic mortgages at bargain rates. Now, why anybody would want that, I don't know, but Fannie and Freddie did. Well, actually, I do know. It's because there was a program at Countrywide called VIP loans, known informally as Friends of Angelo. And this is where influential people in government were able to get loans from Countrywide on especially favorable terms. Now, they'd have to be pretty darn favorable. And when you'll lend $350,000 to a part-time housekeeper making $200 a week, I don't know what you do to be more favorable than that, but they were doing it. Let me give you a list of the people in Washington who were beneficiaries of Friends of Angelo loans. Now, this just reads like a who's who of some of the sterling characters of our age, such as John Edwards. Some surprising characters who've actually survived and in our positions of special power. Senator Kent Conrad, who at this very moment is the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. I love this one. Chris Dodd, the guy whose name is part of Dodd-Frank, the financial re-regulation bill that was only necessary because this stuff blew up. Alphonso Jackson, the Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development. And this is the best. Daniel H. Mudd. This is a guy who grew up having to deal with that famous saying, your name is Mudd. His name actually was Mudd. He was also the chairman and CEO of Fannie Mae. So, this is what we libertarians need to watch out for. The unholy alliance of government and corporations. Now, to draw the contrast, though, I don't want to leaving you the idea that all corporations are bad or that all bankers are bad just because Angela Mozillo is. The hero given the most loving treatment in my book is a fellow named John Allison. He is the former chairman and CEO of BB&T. BB&T is one of the top dozen banks in the United States, ranked by asset size. They are absolutely dominant throughout the 13 southern states of the United States. So out here, you won't see a BB&T branch, but if you're in Mississippi or Alabama or Tennessee or Washington, D.C., you certainly will. Allison built BB&T on utterly different principles than Angela Mozillo built Countrywide. Countrywide blew up in the financial crisis, caused the financial crisis. BB&T totally survived the financial crisis. It and J.P. Morgan were the only two large banks that did. How did Allison do it? Allison happens to be an Ayn Rand fanatic. In 1985, when he became CEO, he instituted a policy of having his whole executive group read Atlas Shrugged. He created a statement of mission, purpose, and values for BB&T. I have a copy of it here. This is a remarkable book. I'm proud to say this is inscribed to me by John. Oh, speaking of inscribed by John, after I'm done here, there's going to be a book signing of my book over at the Laissez-Faire booth, and John Allison, who is here and is going to be speaking at 10:30 in the Silver Room on the financial crisis, he's going to join me for the book signing. So if you would like to have not only the author of the book, but the main subject of the book sign the book, we'd be happy to do it for you. And John is a wonderful, charming man. This is your opportunity to interact with him. So Atlas Shrugged has been a best-selling book, but there are 30,000 employees of BB&T right now, and over 25 years, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of copies of this book has been produced. This book embodies John Galt's famous speech at the end of Atlas Shrugged. This is basically a summary of objectivism applied to how to run a business. And all 30,000 BB&T employees, right down to the tellers, are evaluated every 6 months based on how they are complying with these Randian ideals. Now, I want to quote to you from this and tell you what BB&T's statement of purpose is. Now think about this for a second. If you've ever worked for a large company, you know what their purpose statements are. It's to serve our communities, or save the gay whales, or something like that. Here's BB&T's purpose. Our ultimate purpose is to create superior long-term economic rewards for our shareholders. We're in it for the money. Who knew? Folks, they're all in it for the money. This is the guy who's honest about it. What happens when you're not honest about it? Instead of having 30,000 employees, you got 30,000 liars. That works for Countrywide. Don't try that one. Be honest with your employees. This is a noble mission. We all want to succeed. We all want to make money. We all understand that shareholders have to make money. Just say it. There are 10 fundamental values that support this at BB&T. I'm going to read them one at a time and tell you how this helped BB&T avoid the financial crisis. Value number 1 is reality. Boy, that's why say that, right? I mean, don't we all live in reality? Don't we always have to all respect reality in our work and in every phase of our lives? Well, apparently not. Angela Mozilla didn't expect reality. The people who ran Lehman Brothers didn't respect reality. The people who ran AIG didn't respect reality. I don't know what fantasy world they were living in, but you look back at some of the stuff they did, it just makes no sense. It was not about reality. So reality is their prime virtue. Their second virtue that they ask from every employee, right down to the teller line, is reason. Okay, you're starting to see the Ayn Rand connection? What does she call her philosophy? Objectivism. How does she characterize herself? She says, I am a philosopher of reason. This is what it's all about. Reality is what's out there. Reason is what's in here. It's our tool for apprehending and dealing with and profiting from what is out there. You have got to use reason to run your business. AIG didn't use reason. Lehman didn't use reason. What did they use? Fancy computer models that quants made for them. That worked really well. Maybe if they'd thrown in a few more Greek letters, it would have worked out. We'll have to try that again sometime. I hope not. The third virtue at BB&T is independent thinking. How about that? A bank that actually wants its employees to think independently. Let me tell you what that meant to BB&T. While the entire U.S. banking industry was figuring out how to compete with Countrywide and earn those big fees, in other words, to be short-term greedy, what were they doing? They were inventing all these crazy new so-called exotic mortgages. And the word exotic has now gotten anagrammed into toxic. And those mortgages consisted of things like negative amortization, and you get to so-called pick a payment. This was the way all banks in the United States made their money in the 2000s, except for BB&T, because there was an independent thinker who wasn't even particularly high up in the executive hierarchy, who said, this is really a bad idea for our customers. We're just not going to do this. John Allison didn't even make that decision. He heard about that decision after it was made. He said, yeah, that's the right decision. I trained this guy well. So these guys didn't blow up the world. And they didn't blow up when the world blew up because of independent thinking. The next value is productivity. Probably nothing needs to be said about that. The next value is honesty. Well, of course, bankers are supposed to be honest. They're not supposed to have their hands in the cookie jar. But let me tell you, dishonesty pervades business, especially when you lie at the beginning about what the purpose of the business is. Dishonesty pervades businesses when you promote and give power to and perks to and look the other way when somebody fudges and bends the rules and happens to make a lot of money that year for the company. That doesn't happen at BB&T. The next virtue is integrity. You know, it's one thing to say, fancy words, but let me tell you how they put this into practice. Does everybody here remember the Supreme Court's Kelo decision, K-E-L-O? This was the decision affirming the ability of governments to seize private property and hand it over to, not to use it for government use, like to build a freeway, but to hand it over to other private parties, like for real estate development. Scandalous, scandalous decision against property rights. When John Allison heard about that, he said, oh my God, there's nothing more fundamental to a bank than property rights. We can't support this, so what are we going to do? I know. Let's declare that BB&T will never make a loan to a real estate developer to put up one brick or girder on any property that was acquired through eminent domain. Now, it just so happened that the guy got about 1 million letters from customers saying, go, yeah, baby, way to go. Oh my God, there's a banker who has integrity. I'm moving my checking account to you. So you can do well by doing good. Another principle is justice. It's very important for a company like BB&T. They have grown by acquisition. They've done lots and lots of acquisitions and mergers of equal and takeovers. That's a very hard thing to do, because when a big company like BB&T takes over a little company like XYZ, the employees of XYZ are afraid they're going to lose their job. At BB&T, they look at the employees of XYZ and they say, okay, you're in that particular functional area, and you do it better than the BB&T incumbent who does that, so it's only justice to give you the job. That makes BB&T a preferred acquirer, which means it can acquire companies at a lower price than more predatory companies can. Justice has another meaning at BB&T. BB&T is headquartered in Winston-Salem. That is an area where racial discrimination has historically been a big issue. Racial awareness is obviously a big issue everywhere all the time. It's a national obsession. Let me read to you from that book about what they say about their policy on race. At BB&T, we do not discriminate based on non-essentials, such as race, sex, nationality. Is that cool, to call race a non-essential? It gets better. They go on to say, oh, we do discriminate based on competency, performance, and character. You just got to love these guys. Now, BB&T is the bank that Atlas built. Absolutely bulletproof. Came through the crash smelling like a rose. But there's a tragic end to this story. In the summer of 2008, after Lehman fell and Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson came up with TARP, during the 3 or 4 week period when that was very violently debated in the Congress and among the American public, John Allison took a very courageous stand opposing TARP. The fact is, his bank didn't need it. But he opposed it in general. He opposed it on the grounds of moral hazard, on the grounds he didn't want to see government taking over any industry, including banking. Then a very sad thing happened. When TARP passed, Henry Paulson had the idea that if the Treasury said, okay, this bank needs it, this bank needs it, this one doesn't, this one does, this one doesn't, then all the ones who did need it would be identified as pariahs, all the depositors would run. So you know what we're going to do? All of you in this room aren't sick, but we're going to give you all the medicine, because we don't want you to know which ones of you are sick. So, what was that medicine? That medicine was that the government became a preferred shareholder in your bank. The government took options on common equity in your bank. The government made you sign a 250-page contract, the last section of which said that the government would develop in the future rules for executive compensation, which you would agree to abide by no matter what they were. And further, the government might come up with all kinds of other rules with respect to you, which under this contract you will not question. BB&T had been audited the previous week, passed with flying colors. Then one evening, BB&T's regulator met with John Allison and said, you really need to sign this contract. He said, I don't need to sign this contract. My bank is absolutely bulletproof. You just audited us. And the regulator said, oh, that was last week. We've changed the capital requirements. Okay, well, what have you changed them to? Maybe we passed the new capital requirements. Well, we don't know what the new capital requirements are going to be, but we just know you didn't pass. Please sign this. So what's John Allison to do? It's a terrible position to be in. Absolutely morally opposed to signing that contract, but if he doesn't sign that, the government destroys the bank. So he signed it. He is now the former chairman and CEO of BB&T. He is John Galt. He walked away. He retired. When John Galt left the economic world, he became an agent for the morality of capitalism, and that's what John Allison is now doing. Through the BB&T Foundation, he is endowing programs at dozens of universities throughout BB&T's footprint in the South to teach the morality of capitalism, where assigned reading is Atlas Shrugged. So he's doing the work. The last Rand character with an analogy in the real world I want to talk about, I'm going to end on a negative note. I'm going to end talking about a villain. Back to the Fountainhead. Everybody remember in the Fountainhead, the main villain was Ellsworth Toohey. He was a socialist. He was this scheming dwarf. He was a newspaper columnist who used his column to tell lies and manipulate. You guessed it. I'm talking about Paul Krugman. Now, back to the, you can't make it up stuff. The analogies between Krugman and Toohey are so striking, it's just downright eerie. They're both socialists. I'm going to quote Krugman here. He says, quote, "I am an unabashed defender of the welfare state, which I regard as the most decent social arrangement yet devised." He says that he advocates a state that offers everyone who's underpaid additional income. He and Toohey both hate rich people. Krugman once wrote in a column that rich people must be defenders of the downtrodden. Otherwise, they have no hope of, quote-unquote, justifying their existence. So we have to kill them if they disagree with Paul Krugman? Now, there's a little bit of a hypocrite thing here, or are we surprised? Paul Krugman has to be a very wealthy man. We know from public records that he has a $1 million home in St. Kitts. He has a $1 million apartment in New York. He has a multi-million-dollar estate in Princeton, New Jersey, where he teaches. It's, I think, a 6,000 square foot home with 12-foot ceilings and a music room. And according to an article in the New Yorker, it has a fire pit outside where he and other Princeton faculty members have been known to burn in effigy various Republican politicians. So he hates the rich except for himself. Toohey and Krugman exalt the incompetent at the expense of the competent. Here's one of my favorite Krugman quotes. "The official ideology of America's elite remains one of meritocracy. That won't last." Both Toohey and Krugman are simply outright liars. No less a personage than Daniel Okrent, the public editor or ombudsman of the New York Times, once wrote, quote, "Paul Krugman has the disturbing habit of shaping, slicing, and selectively citing numbers in a fashion that pleases his acolytes." Both Paul Krugman and Ellsworth Toohey are physically very small. They've got Napoleon complexes. Freud said anatomy is destiny. I agree with that. Krugman once wrote, "I'm just not imposing enough in person to be inspiring. If only I were a few inches taller." Newsweek once called him gnomishly handsome. I agree with the gnomish part, at least. So what I want to know is the reason he opposed the Bush tax cuts, was when he said, "They are a step on the way to a system in which only the little people pay taxes"? You be the judge. I report you decide. Krugman is also probably a little crazy. He once wrote, and I quote, "My economic theories have no doubt been influenced by my relationship with my cats." This explains a lot. Okay, now this is the part where somebody says, "Well, didn't he win the Nobel Prize? Isn't he a respected economist?" Come on. Yasser Arafat won the Nobel Prize. Jimmy Carter won the Nobel Prize. Barack Obama won the Nobel Prize. Anybody can win the Nobel Prize. All you have to be is a liberal or a terrorist. The real test of an economist is whether you can make a correct prediction. In 1982, when Krugman was, get this, he was part of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Reagan White House. And he wrote a paper in 1982 when we had just come off like the all-time peak in U.S. inflation, at least since the Civil War. He wrote a paper called The Inflation Time Bomb, predicting that inflation would skyrocket and throw the world back into depression. Basically, ever since he wrote that paper, inflation has been lower. In fact, it's been practically at zero. He hates big government deficits, as long as they're in the Bush administration. And he's terrified that they're going to create sky-high interest rates. He loves deficits now in the Obama administration. He says, don't worry about interest rates. The U.S. has infinite borrowing capacity. In 1983, I created a project called the Krugman Truth Squad. Nowadays, the fancy word for what we did would be crowdsourcing, where you use the internet, blogs, to get dozens of like-minded people to participate in a joint project. And the project at the time was, every time Paul Krugman writes a column, all of you members of the Krugman Truth Squad stay up all night fact-checking it. Catch every lie, every error, every distortion, every misquotation, every out-of-context quotation, email me with it. I'll have it published on National Review Online the next day as a Krugman Truth Squad column. We did about 100 Krugman Truth Squad columns over 7 years. It resulted in dozens of major retractions by Krugman of errors and lies and distortions and misquotations. But before it did that, it had to result in not once but twice getting the New York Times, for the first time in its more than century-long history, to institute an official policy under which its opinion columnists are obliged to correct their errors. They didn't have that policy. Now, let me tell you what's so powerful about that. When they can't lie, liberals have nothing to say. I've just got the 2-minute mark, so I'm just going to end by saying that I had a personal experience with Paul Krugman that was not entirely pleasant. In the midst of all this that I've been talking about, I went to a book signing of his. I listened to him give a lecture to an audience that just hung on every word. At the end, I went up and had him inscribe to me a copy of his book, and I identified myself to him. The next week, he went on national TV and said that I was stalking him. Stalking is a felony. He went on national TV and accused me of committing a felony because I paid for his book and asked him to sign it. Now, let me tell you what happens in the age of the internet when someone like Paul Krugman goes on TV and accuses someone like me of committing a felony. For the next 3 weeks, I lived in a 24/7 world of hate. Death threats against my family. This stuff is blood sport. Make no mistake about it. This is why such rotten people are in public life. Because either they're the kind of insensitive people who just aren't hurt by those kinds of things, or they're just such puritanical fanatics that you can't get anything on them. Either way, you don't want them ruling you. So what's the Ayn Rand lesson here? Well, you can fight the power. You identify a force of evil like Paul Krugman. If you want to make it your hobby or your mission like I did, to take this guy down a peg, pull a few fangs out of him, make him less powerful. You can pay the price, but you can do it. Now, we've got a book signing coming up with me and John Allison. It's going to be